I remember when I first got my N64. It was the first game console I actually bought with my own money. I had begged my mom to bring me to a pawn shop that was fairly close to where I lived, and there it was. I was so determined to buy it that I pooled all the money I had, and with it was barely able to, as well as getting copies of Star Fox 64 and Mission Impossible. That was a weird one in its own right, let me tell you. Now, this was 2001, and Nintendo's next big thing was just on the horizon, but I had no idea. We didn't have internet, and I wasn't the type to buy too many magazines. Even if I had known the GameCube was coming, it wouldn't matter. I was just happy to own a home console for the first time in my life. I love this thing, and it brought me so much fun and so many good times. Needless to say, most of my attention went to Star Fox 64 when I got it, but the Lylat system could only entertain me for so long. I adore Star Fox 64 to this day, but at the time I was looking for something a little bigger and more substantive. I was also like 11 and didn't have a lot of experience with video games, so big hitters like The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time didn't actually interest me right away. What did interest me was Mario. I had played Super Smash Bros. And Super Mario 64 on friends' consoles earlier, and played the crap out of the NES games when I had the chance, so yeah, I recognized Mario. While browsing an old video rental store, remember those, a game that would catch my eye would influence my tastes in video games, well, forever. The game in question was none other than Paper Mario. Paper Mario wasn't my introduction to JRPGs, I got the same introduction as basically everyone else in the late 90s, Pokemon Red and Blue. But at the time, I only really liked that game for the collection aspects. I didn't really appreciate the game design that much. Oh, just as an aside, it's amazing how much value you can get out of what's essentially game rentals nowadays. For the money I spent to rent Paper Mario for 1 week, you can get huge libraries for a month or more, including Paper Mario in fact. During the writing and recording of this video, Nintendo announced N64 games are going to be coming to their Switch Online service, so if you have a Switch, you'll be able to play it fairly soon. So hey, this is Unscripted ScionVyse. As I was rendering this video, Nintendo actually announced the pricing for the Switch Online expansion pack thing, and it's like really bad value. I normally wouldn't interrupt a video for this, but like, wow. I'm not suggesting you do anything unscrupulous, but I'm also not really recommending going for that right now. Anyways, back to the video. Seeing Mario on the cover like this was really intriguing. Like, it was definitely Mario, but he didn't look like the Mario I'd seen before. I remember renting it around the time my family got a new cat and playing for hours. I don't remember the specifics of that first playthrough. All I remember for sure is loving every second of it, and loving every other time I've played it since. Despite this, I've never actually tried to take a more critical look at it to see if the love I have for it is just nostalgia or if it really is that good. Hey people, it's ScionVyse, and let's settle this once and for all. Is Paper Mario as good as I remember, or is it just a paper-thin imitation of the genre? Before I start this review proper, I need to address the Boshi in the room. I know that objectively on some level Paper Mario is a sort of successor to Super Mario RPG. However, I've never seen Paper Mario like this because I never owned a SNES and therefore never played Super Mario RPG growing up. In fact, I only ever beat that game for the first time this year, which has definitely impacted my opinions. A lot of people see Paper Mario as an experimental pseudo-sequel to Super Mario RPG, but I actually kinda see it the other way around. To me, Super Mario RPG is just a more primitive, less polished version of what would eventually become Paper Mario. I don't think either point of view is exactly right or wrong, like objectively, but that's just where I'm coming at this game from. But enough of that, it's time to get into Paper Mario. And the first thing I should probably discuss is the first thing anyone noticed about this game, the visual style. It's really fun and unique, and similarly surprising considering the system it released on. Paper Mario released on the N64, and on the tail edge of its lifespan at that. Most games were pushing the system to its limits with top-of-the-line 3D graphics, some even going so far as to need the N64's memory expansion pack, like Majora's Mask. Paper Mario goes in the complete opposite direction. It aims for a sort of papercraft diorama art style where environments and objects are largely rendered in 3D, albeit with very basic models and textures, and all the characters are 2D sprites. These sprites are specifically designed to be flat to get the paper aesthetic across more concretely, as the N64 didn't actually handle textures super well, so they couldn't properly convey the paperness through texture alone. This paper aesthetic is a huge part of the game, but the name Paper Mario? It was actually largely a marketing thing. I know this has already been beaten into the ground, but I have to point it out because it will be important later. The original Japanese name for Paper Mario is Mario Story. Before anyone makes a comment about it, yes, the name isn't completely unrelated to the visuals. I likened it to a diorama, but Paper Mario is just as much, if not more so, a pop-up storybook. But I and many other people interpret that name a little more literally. Paper Mario is a Mario story. One that uses fairly standard Mario theming, races, and ideas, but a story nonetheless. Renaming the series to Paper Mario seems innocuous at first, but that simple rebrand will become a stain, a pox on this franchise. Oh, huh? What was I talking about again? Oh, right, the visual style. I really like it. This is about as cliche a description of any Nintendo's game's visuals can be, but it's just so charming. How buildings fold apart when you enter them, how Mario falls like a sheet of paper, how much expression they managed to get out of these characters on a system that was very bad at doing so. The sprites are all just so lovingly crafted and give all these traditional Mario characters a look that is still Mario, but has its own unique feel. This all compounds into a look that, in my opinion, is pretty much timeless. Sure, the sprites are low resolution by modern standards, but that doesn't really matter, and updating the game with one of those HD texture mods which makes it look like one of the newer Paper Mario games doesn't actually necessarily even improve it, just makes it smoother. Despite being the type to normally go for these updated textures, the sequel Thousand Year Door definitely benefits from them. I never even felt the need to try to swap them out. Yes, that may be my nostalgia talking, but I know what I like, and I like how Paper Mario looks as it is. Oh, and just for some clarification here, I am emulating the game, so the footage you're seeing here is a bit sharper than it would originally look. That's a decision I made to make the video look nicer. Obviously, the game was designed for CRT TVs with like a 240i resolution or something like that. I just don't think footage that came out looking like this would be as nice for the video in the long term. I mean, it would probably be fine, but it's not like anyone has a CRT anymore anyways, so this is more representative of what you'd be seeing now anyways. So, when you first load up the game, you're greeted with a nice opening scene which sets the stage for what the game is about. It's a nice little story about the Star Spirits, Star Haven, and the wish-granting Star Rod, until a page is turned and some weird Magic Koopa has been taped to the page. As it turns out, this was Bowser's doing, and the scene seamlessly transitions to the moment when Bowser stormed Star Haven to steal the Star Rod, and entraps the Star Spirits in cards. It's a pretty simple setup, but it's effective. Bowser's up to no good, and without the Star Spirits and Star Rod, no one's wishes can be granted aside from Bowser's. This was just step one though, he's got more up his sleeve. Starting the game proper, a unique looking paratrooper drops off some mail at Mario and Luigi's house, which is an invitation to Peach's castle for a party. You first get control of Mario at this party, and I really like this first section. You don't get to explore much aside from the kitchen and Peach's room if you pester the guard enough, but you can talk to other guests at the party. I really like this because it's a quick and easy way to tease what you'll be seeing later on in the game, like these penguin guys or the mouse talking to a toad with head wrapping. Mario makes his way to the upper floors to meet with Peach when an earthquake suddenly hits and the entire castle is lifted up into the sky. Bowser makes his appearance and we have our first taste of battle. The first few battles here are basically playable cutscenes purely to introduce the basics of combat, so we'll skip over that for now. Mario and Bowser exchange blows for a few turns, then deciding he's had enough, Bowser uses his newly gained Star Rod to make himself invincible. And after losing the fight, Mario is thrown from the castle by an attack and falls to the ground below. This was actually pretty shocking when I first saw it. Mario always beats Bowser. I mean, sure, he could kill you in other Mario games, but he was never that much of a threat. Now though, he's in a class completely beyond what Mario is capable of beating, which is super enthralling because it adds another goal right away. It's not just, how will Mario get to Bowser so he can punch him in the face? It's also, what is Mario going to do about the Star Rod, which seems like an insurmountable obstacle. That one extra wrinkle in the standard Mario setup did a huge amount to make me care and make me want to find out how things would go. That being said, the intro prologue here is pretty slow and after the castle scene, uneventful. A lot of RPGs open this way, with big, bombastic opening sequences followed by a slower, more subdued section to establish the world and characters. That isn't bad by any means, but I feel like it goes on noticeably longer than is necessary. After Bowser's castle scene, all before Chapter 1, Mario gets his next goal, talks to some Goombas, gets his hammer, learns how to use the hammer outside of battle, learns how to use it in battle, learns about items, gets his first partner, learns about badges, fights 3 bosses, gets an exposition dump, and we see what Peach is up to in the castle. The opening here gets to be a bit of a drag, and not because of what's there, but because of what isn't. The thing you're going to be doing most in basically any RPG is battling, and Paper Mario has one of my favorite systems once it's fully formed and explorable. One of the most important parts of this game's battle system are action commands, which lets you do extra damage or reduce the amount of damage you take if you perform the right actions at the right time. Well, everything I blitzed through for this opening here, which can take over an hour by the way, all of that is done without any action commands, so when it's your turn, all you can do is choose what attack to use and what enemy to use it on. It's honestly not a great first impression, it makes the battle system seem far simpler than it actually is, and because of how long the prologue is, it takes way longer to flesh the system out than is necessary. Speaking of fleshing out the battle system, let's do that. So, once we get action commands, Mario has the ability to jump, hammer, and use items to defeat his enemies in battle. Thanks to the badge system though, he's not limited to those basic moves, and you're able to hugely customize how he battles. At a glance, badges in Paper Mario are very akin to the materia system in Final Fantasy VII. You get little kajiggers that augment your abilities or let you perform more powerful moves, but despite the fact that materia is far more complex, I actually think I prefer how Paper Mario does it. Mario has a set number of badge points which he can use to equip them. Each badge has a set number of points required to equip, with more powerful or useful badges requiring more. So if you're wanting to equip that attack or defense boosting badge, you're going to have to commit a larger amount of your resources to do it. Resources that could be used to add more moves to Mario's repertoire. And the badge abilities themselves are so varied and allow for so many different playstyles that it really encourages exploration and experimentation. You can build Mario however you want to play, basically. Do you want to use a lot of items? You can equip Double Dip to use 2 items in a turn, and Refund to get half of that item's value back in coins to buy more. Like dealing huge numbers in a single hit, combo Power Smash with Charge Hammer, and go wild. For my first playthrough to make this video, I went with a defense-focused exclusive jump build where I had defense up, took less damage when I defended, and all of my attacking badges were jump related, so I never used the hammer once I got the ability to jump on spiked enemies without taking damage. The footage is from my second, where I went with a more hammer focused build. This is such a huge reason why I love replaying this and its sequel so much. You can play the game in so many different ways, so each new playthrough can teach you new strategies, and in my experience, pretty much anything you can do is more or less viable to some degree. But since you can change your badges out whenever you want, you're not completely stuck in a build if you don't end up liking it. Another thing that keeps me coming back is a bit more fundamental. You may have noticed something small while watching the footage of these battles, and that something is the stat and damage numbers. They start out as small as possible, basically. Most RPGs don't do this. Now, I understand for the most part why most RPGs use larger numbers. It's to add a bit of randomness to each hit and to give a stronger sense of growth, but over time some franchises have inflated numbers to the point where it's basically incomprehensible, and these numbers just don't have any meaning anymore. Paper Mario's decision to keep the numbers to, for the most part, single-digit integers is brilliant because not only is it simple and easy to understand, but the entire game's design becomes far more deliberate this way. First, Mario's stats start out at 10 HP, 5 flower points, and 3 badge points. As you defeat enemies, you gain star points, and once you reach 100, you level up, which lets you increase one of those stats. Again, unlike many other RPGs where level up requirements normally increase to force you to find stronger enemies, Paper Mario's solution is more clever. Enemies don't drop a set number of star points. Over-leveled enemies will drop more, allowing Mario to level up with fewer battles from them, and weaker enemies will drop less, Eventually, once they're far enough behind, they'll stop dropping star points at all. This is a really smart way to discourage grinding, which is a huge plus in my eyes. I hate grinding most of the time, and despite loving this game's battle system, if I had to spend an hour in between each chapter grinding up levels to survive the next, I'd probably get sick of it after a while. This also makes sure that average players are all around the same level at each point in the game, and encourages players to consistently push onwards to new things. Because of this, I honestly can't remember a game that had a better, smoother difficulty curve than Paper Mario. Seriously, there's like one mandatory fight that's probably a bit too tough for its point in the game, namely Huff and Puff, and even then not really. No other mandatory fight felt out of my league or too much, and at the same time, nothing really feels too easy if you're not exploiting one of the game's more, let's say, powerful mechanics like sleep and paralysis. Not that there aren't tough fights or anything, there absolutely are. Kent C. Koopa and the dojo's master are both optional bosses that are incredibly tough, but are really rewarding to beat. There's one final thing that sets Paper Mario's combat apart from its contemporaries, its party members, or lack thereof, sort of. Mario does get a merry band of misfits to join his quest, but none of them act quite like party members in other games. They don't have their own HP or FP, they can't get permanently KO'd in battle, but they take separate actions and have separate abilities. They also don't level up like Mario does, getting powered up instead by super blocks that are found throughout the game. So they're kind of a weird middle ground between party member and special skill. They also largely can't take advantage of the badge system, so the strategy they offer is less in how you build them and more in how you utilize each one. Your team grows from just having Goombario in the prologue to having 8 teammates by the end of Chapter 6. Each partner has their own strengths and weaknesses too, and all are good in different situations. Lady Bo is my mid-game go-to because of her unparalleled single-target damage if an opponent has no defense. Bombette is best for crowd control as she has the highest damage AoE attack, and Sushi's great for boosting Mario's defense and attacking fire-based enemies, which are pretty common later on. My favorite party member hands down though is Watt. She's great for a multitude of reasons. She can boost Mario's attack, she gets a mass stun attack, and most importantly, her standard attack ignores enemy defenses, making her invaluable later on when enemies come stock standard with 2 or even 3 points of defense. I love how Paper Mario uses the game's action commands to make each partner feel unique too. Mario's action commands are either just pressing A at the right time or holding left on the stick until you're told. Most partners have completely unique action commands though. Paracarry has you timing the release of a moving reticle, Lackluster has you directly aiming a reticle at an enemy, and Sushi has this, which is way harder than it seems. All this gives action commands much needed variety, which simply isn't there from Mario alone. As you rescue star spirits, you gain star power as well, which will let you use a specific power that you are granted by each spirit. These are all super useful, some even being a bit too strong in my opinion. You get Starstorm from the 3rd star spirit, and it can basically carry you through any regular battle you find yourself in for the next 2 or 3 chapters at least. For 2 bars of star power, this move does 7 damage to all enemies. Now, obviously, since it takes 2 bars of star power, and star power does take some time to build up, you can't just use it willy-nilly, but I do think it's a little bit too strong for what it is. Some of the later powers are just as strong, if not more so, and if you have badges like Deep or Group Focus, you can really end up relying on them so much that it can kill some of the game's difficulty. But that really is my biggest gripe with Paper Mario's combat, that some of the later abilities are a bit too good if you build Mario in a way that can use them far more often than normal. Overall though, it's just so much fun and holds up so well even over 20 years later. Now, being an 11-year-old with limited money relying on the local video rental store for all of his gaming needs, my time with Paper Mario was always fragmented. I never owned the game until its release on Wii's Virtual Console, so whenever my rental period was up, that was it until I got another $8 or so to rent it for another few days. So Paper Mario's structure was an absolute godsend for me. There's no real reason to talk about Paper Mario's story as a whole, as on the basis level, if you've played Super Mario Bros., you know Paper Mario's plot. Bowser kidnaps Peach, Mario has to traverse 8 themed worlds to reach him, Mario beats Bowser, the end. The overarching narrative isn't what's interesting about Paper Mario, it's the individual chapters that are. Each chapter plays out like a fairly standalone episode, ending with Mario getting a Star Spirit who will help him get to Bowser. I think most of them are great, but there are obviously some standouts. Chapter 3 is probably my favorite overall. Not that the earlier chapters aren't good, but this is the first one that really gets creative and does a lot of super fun and interesting things. Mario travels through the Lost Woods, a creepy haunted house with a lot of fun little scenarios, a destitute Boo village, and finally a big mansion with guards that'll chase you and send you back to the front door if you're caught. But that's just the area. Tubba Blubba, oh my god, I just got that name pun, is seemingly invincible, so along with searching for the Star Spirit, Mario's main goal is to find out what his weakness is. Each chapter does a great job of feeling unique from the rest, and that's aided by the enemies, which are mostly unique wherever you go. The enemies in this chapter are usually hyper, who can charge up for huge damage if you're not careful, so you'll need to use your new partner Bo's ability to go invisible when they attack. Speaking of which, the game does such a good job of organically teaching the player mechanics through its party members. Goombario helps the player learn about enemies and gives them more opportunity to learn the basic action commands. Kooper teaches the importance of attacking multiple enemies at once. Watt teaches how important it is to be able to remove or attack through enemy defenses, etc. Their field abilities are introduced just as well. They're all done in clear tutorial areas, but it never takes you out of the experience to do it. After you've got Bombette, you have to use her to break a wall or you can't escape your prison, and after you defeat the lantern ghost that trapped Watt, the room goes dark and she has to light the way out. The game teaches its mechanics in such an organic way that it rarely feels like it needs separate tutorials. In fact, the only tutorials the game has are for badges, action commands, and star power. After that, you're on your own, but because it teaches things so well as you go, it never feels like a sink or swim situation, which could overwhelm new players. And of course, if you don't need the help, you can always skip these tutorials, which is very much welcome. The level design and exploration definitely helps accommodate new players as well. It's generally very simple, none of the puzzles are brain melters, and there are very few opportunities to get lost. But that doesn't mean there's no reason to go exploring, because there absolutely is. There are lots of side paths, nooks and crannies basically everywhere, and most of them will have important goodies. There are loads of new badges, hidden star pieces, and even invisible blocks to find with Watt's help. And because there's so much around, even in areas that seem unimportant, I'll still go around to see if there's anything hidden that I may have missed. Now this is still a JRPG, and it isn't always completely clear to new players where to go. If you do get stuck, you're not completely hung out to dry. You can always go talk to the wizard Merlin and he will give you a hint about your next step. He's just one of the many friendly faces Mario will be meeting along his journey. Almost every chapter has a new town that Mario visits full of fun characters. From the little Goomba village to the Boo settlement in Gusty Gulch, to the Yoshi village with references to Yoshi's Island, they're all great and really do a lot to fill out the world. But there is one town to rule them all, and obviously that's Toad Town. Toad Town is the hub area. Mario will be moving through it in between every chapter. It's got all the amenities a JRPG protagonist could ever need. Multiple shops, including the Badge Shop, a Toad House to rest in, the Game Corner, and more. There's lots of reasons why I love Toad Town, but like a lot of things in this game, it's just cozy. However, there is still a lot to do here, which makes Toad Town all the more important. Training at the dojo, hatching little oinks to get items, playing minigames at the Game Corner, heading back to Mario's house to see what Luigi's up to, and reading his secret diary are all great and make being in and exploring around Toad Town a blast. Your partners even get letters from people they know, which you can read at the post office. I love little details like this. These letters didn't need to be made, but it helps flesh out a few of the characters a bit more than they are during the main adventure. One other thing I love about Toad Town is that it's basically central to every area in the game. All other chapters are directly accessed from it, and while some do take a bit of exploring to find, some other chapters are even directly within Toad Town, like Shy Guy's Toy Box. This may be a bit of a hot take, but I adore Shy Guy's Toy Box, largely due to how it uses Toad Town. After defeating Tubba Blubba, Mario returns to town to find that it's overrun with Shy Guys. They're harassing citizens, taking over shops, stealing people's things, and then disappearing. So Mario has to find out where the Shy Guys are hiding, which involves moving around town and talking to people. As you do, you can talk to some NPCs that have had their belongings stolen by the Shy Guys, and this is one of the reasons why I love this chapter. You're not just saving Toad Town as a whole, you're directly helping individual characters that you've met throughout the game, ones that have very likely been helping you already. For instance, Ralph and Ruff's badge shop has had their calculator stolen, so they can't sell you any more badges until you get it back. Or Taste Tea, who can't cook you any more food until you get her frying pan back. It may sound silly, but this makes the chapter feel more personal and important. Mario's not just walking into a new place, getting access to a dungeon, fighting a boss, and leaving. There's more of an impact and influence on the world here. Speaking of influence, Princess Peach, despite being trapped in a castle well above the Mushroom Kingdom, still manages to be a big help in Mario's quest. In between every chapter, there's a mini interlude where the player gets to take control of Peach and explore a bit of the castle. I love this not only because it keeps Peach an active force in the story, but it lets the game play around with some other gameplay elements that aren't as relevant in the main quest. Peach will bake a cake for Gourmet Guy, participate in a game show, and even magically disguise herself as Bowser's minions to get more access to the castle. And sure enough, basically every time, she learns about the locations of the next Star Spirit, and with the help of her new friend Twink, passes that knowledge on to Mario. These sections do a lot for the pacing of the game too, believe it or not. Not only do they bookend each chapter, but each section being so different helps break away from the monotony of the main RPG. Shakes things up, you know? But I also like that it's separate from the main adventure. The game is able to experiment with these different situations, but lets Mario's journey be more focused. Best of both worlds. I don't have a segue here, but I also adore the game's music. I wouldn't put any one track as like, best video game music of all time, but it's a lot of fun and it's got a surprising amount of range, which you may not expect right from the get-go. From the icy serenity of Cold Reception in Shiver City, to the familiar coziness of Toad Town, it can really be calm when it needs to be, but it isn't always. Trojan Bowser still gives me the creeps every time I hear it. And some of the battle themes are complete jams, like Freeze. Of course, not every track is a hit, but most are, and nostalgia be damned, I love this soundtrack. And yes, there are some limitations, like relying on the N64 sound chip, so a lot of the instruments here sound exactly like they do in every other N64 game. Now, I've mainly just been raving about how much I love pretty much everything in this game, but of course there are some things that aren't quite as good as the majority. There are a few parts that drag and aren't nearly as fun, like the opening, but never is this more true than in Chapter 6, Flower Fields. This whole chapter is a slog, and it can be a real pain to access if you don't already know what you need to do. So, getting into Flower Fields is pretty easy. There's a door right in Toad Town. At least once you've gotten all 4 items you need to make it appear, items that are spread across the game in multiple different areas, and if you haven't explored and talked to all of the bulbs that give you them as you go, you'll be stuck doing a bunch of backtracking. Once you get into the fields, the chapter doesn't get any less tedious, in fact it gets worse. From the main area, there's 6 different area branches, and you kinda just have to guess which ones to go through until you find the right one. And this whole chapter is basically one big trading sequence, going from flower to flower, finding items, trading them for more, until you can finally make your way to your ultimate goal. It pretty much sucks, and the enemies only really make it worse. The bees lunge at Mario so quickly in the overworld that you can't react, and do so much damage that going back to Toad Town to rest became a frequent occurrence. And like I said earlier, the boss here, Huff and Puff, is the only real difficulty spike in the game, especially if you don't know what you're going up against. So ultimately, Chapter 6 ends up being a slow, meandering mess that's overly long and boring, even if you know exactly what to do and where to go. And unlike Shy Guy's Toy Box, which gives you a few different ways to achieve those goals and lets you handle some optional ones at your own pace, everything in Flower Fields is just a linear trek with no way to truncate anything. Thankfully, it's only uphill from there. Chapter 7 starts with a fun murder mystery, and you eventually make your way to Starborn Valley, where stars are born and live before ascending into the sky. I really loved being able to see where the Star Kids live, and it's really cool from a lore perspective. Merlin's son looks after the village with Ninjas as his assistants, and of course it ties into Twink as well, since he sort of just appears at the start of the game, so it's nice to see where he came from. The chapter also has a fantastic dungeon that makes you think it's full of mirrors, but it's actually Duplighosts copying all of your movements. It's probably the most inventive from a level design perspective. But the grand finale is really where everything comes together. After saving all of the Star Spirits, Mario returns to Shooting Star Summit, where a new path is made to get him into Star Haven. He's only there for a short time, since it's about time for Bowser to get his scheduled trouncing. Bowser's Castle is an incredible dungeon, filled to the brim with great puzzles, tough enemies, including a final showdown with your first rival, Junior Troopa, and a few of those fun pace breakers that we saw in the Peach sections. Some of the area design here is really cool too. Like, I didn't know there was a dank, dark cave in the middle of Bowser's Castle, but there it is, and it's pretty creepy, especially since you need to use Watt to even move around, as it's pitch black otherwise. That's something that Bowser's Castle is great for too. It uses every party's ability in some way, except for Goombario. You'll be swimming with Sushi, hovering with Lackluster, blowing up stuff with Bombette, the works. It's just complex enough that it feels like you have to actually work your way through it, but it's also never too difficult. It feels like a natural progression that uses all of the tools you've gathered, whereas individual chapters didn't do that as much. They usually focused on one ability above the rest. Finally though, we're up in Peach's castle, and being here is eerie. At the start of the game, the castle is brimming with life. It's bright, bustling, and fun, but now it's dark. Empty. The only things to do here is rest thanks to one toad that hid away in a wardrobe, and collect any items you've stored in a magic box that connects from the castle to a house by Shooting Star Summit. Making it up the stairs, Bowser shows up to preemptively nip the Mario problem in the bud. A battle starts and he uses his Star Rod, which he thinks will make him invincible. But the Star Spirits granted Mario a new ability, one that lets him get past the Star Rod's shield. But despite being beaten, Bowser still got one final trick up his sleeve, and he retreats to make his final stand. Using Kammy Koopa's magic, Bowser powers up and attacks Mario for the final time. He uses the Star Rod again, but this time the Star Spirit's power isn't enough. This is where the real genius of this final encounter happens. Mario is helpless against Bowser, so it's up to Peach to come to the rescue. She can't fight on her own, but her friend Twink can, and thanks to Peach's wishes, Twink just gets stronger and stronger. Going from not making a dent in Kammy's cap to KOing her, that's the final puzzle piece. Peach wishes to give Mario the strength to defeat Bowser, and her wish, along with everyone else's in the Mushroom Kingdom, is strong enough to give the Star Spirits enough oomph to break Bowser's new barrier. With that, Mario is able to fight back and eventually defeats Bowser. His castle explodes, and thanks to the Star Spirits, Peach's castle is gently guided to the ground. I guess thanks for keeping it in geostationary orbit, Bowser. The Star Spirits give Mario their thanks and say their final goodbyes, with Twink following not far behind. From there, the Mushroom Kingdom begins to return to normal, and all of Mario's companions return to their lives, which we get to see a bit of during the epilogue as Pear Carey travels around delivering letters. After that, the game ends how it began, with a celebration at Peach's castle, and everyone's there. All of Mario's partners, other major characters throughout the game, except of course for the Star Spirits and Twink, who are up in Star Haven. This is followed by a parade and a nice touching scene at Mario's house. With that, the story ends, and it does in the best way it could. To me, Paper Mario is an experience that can only happen once in a lifetime. I can't point to any other game and say it influenced the direction of my tastes in games and, in turn, media to the same degree. Is it perfect? No, Is it the best game I've ever played? No. Is it even the best game in its own series? I would say no, but it didn't have to be because it shaped me. It made me appreciate aspects of games that I really hadn't even thought about before, and not to get too hyperbolic, but there's really nothing else like it. It's wholly unique amongst its peers, and even compared to its successors. It feels like home and reminds me of a better time, and while new and more stimulating games have taken a lot of my focus away from it, sometimes there's just no place like home. I love going back to it, seeing all of the places and characters I was so fond of as a kid, and being just as fond of them now. It doesn't hurt being brilliantly designed almost all the way through, but there really is something special here. It's a truly unforgettable experience, and one that I'm going to continue to come back to for the rest of my life. Thank you so much for watching. And everyone who made it to the end here, I'd just like to let you know that I'm starting a Patreon, so if you'd like your name in the credits or just like what I do, there'll be a link in the description if you want to help out. Thanks again.